Okay, hi guys. Today we're going to be looking at active transport in plants. There's a little bit of revision today, but we're going to be looking primarily at active transport and how the organs in the plant, the tissues in the plant, are adapted for that function. So let's kick off. You will find on Insight a worksheet to accompany this, and one of the starting points on that really is to look at what we did last lesson, which is on transpiration. And what I'd like you to do is just to pause the video a minute and have a look at the 6 true or false statements and fill them in on your sheet. It's about halfway down the sheet there, so and I'll reveal the answers in a second. So just pause it now. Okay guys, right, so check your answers. I'm just going to click on solve and hopefully you've got all those right. So well done ladies and gents if you did, better luck next time if you didn't. Right, today we're going to look at active transport, and I want you to understand how the structure of root hair cells, xylem and phloem are adapted to their function, and we're going to look at the 3 different types of transport around plants, but particularly look at active transport. So again, you'll be jumping around your worksheet. It's not necessarily laid out in the same way as this, but if you can have a go at filling that in as we go through, that'd be great. So let's kick off. So let's look at the movement of substances within plants. Well, there's 3 different types of movement. The first one is diffusion. Diffusion is the movement of gases or the movement of particles from a high to a low concentration. And we've done that before. So that's moving down the concentration gradient, and it's a passive process. That means no energy is required for it to take place. So particles move from a high to a low concentration, and we've done this before. We did this last module, so you'll be hopefully quite familiar with this. Okay, it's the net movement from a high to a low concentration. And then the second type is osmosis. Now osmosis is a special type of diffusion because it's the diffusion of water molecules. It's the movement of water molecules, or the net movement of water molecules, from a high to a low concentration of water through a partially permeable membrane. And that again is another significant transport of materials in a plant. So water moves from a high concentration of water to a low concentration of water through a partially permeable membrane. And again, that's a passive process, and it's a passive process because no energy is required for it to take place, because it's moving from a high to low concentration. Okay. Now, what's active transport? Well, active transport is another one we've looked at. In this case, we're having to move particles from a low concentration to a high concentration. That is against the concentration gradient. Because it's against the concentration gradient, energy is required for it to take place. Where do we get energy from? Energy comes from the process of respiration. So the particles that do this require lots of mitochondria, and they need mitochondria because that allows respiration to take place. So this is the movement from a low concentration to a high concentration. That's active transport. Now, how does it take place? It takes place a little bit like this. So this is the cell. Oops, sorry. This is the cell. This is outside the cell. This is inside the cell. And in the cell membrane are things called carrier proteins. Now you can see here there's a high concentration inside the cell and there's a low concentration outside. And what will happen is a particle will be recognized by something like an enzyme. And what that will do is that will use energy from respiration, so mitochondria will drive that process, and that will physically transport it through the cell membrane. Okay, that molecule is moved from the outside of the cell to the inside of the cell. This occurs in various parts in the human body, the reabsorption of certain minerals, but it also occurs in plant tissue. So that's active transport, and root hair cells are very well adapted for this. So root hair cells are very, very small cells on the outside of the roots, and they are very well adapted for this to take place. One thing they will do is pick up water. Well, there's a high concentration of water in the soil, or hopefully a higher concentration of water in the soil, so they will uptake water by osmosis. but the mineral ions that they need, and plants need minerals for growth, there's a very low concentration in the soil, which means that they have to actively transport those ions from the soil into the cell. So how are they adapted for this? One, they've got an incredibly large surface area because the hairs are very, very long and thin. Two, they've got high numbers of mitochondria because active transport requires energy, so they have lots of mitochondria for that to take place. There's then a short distance required to get from the root hair cell to the xylem, because the xylem are going to be transporting those minerals and water upwards. Will they have any chloroplasts? Do root hair cells have chloroplasts? Well, the answer is no. Why is that? Well, the reason for that is because there's very little light gets down to the roots, or no light gets down, so again, photosynthesis is not going to be a significant process underground. So let's look at the next stage of this. So you've then got the xylem. Now the xylem is very well adapted to its structure or to its function because the xylem transports water. I remember that because W is next to X on the alphabet. Not a great way of remembering it, but as I said last time, I'm a chemist. And xylem is dead tissue. How a xylem works is the vessels, the actual cells, lose their end walls. The xylem forms a long, hollow, continuous tube. And the cells then die. They're no longer living, and they form a substance called lignin. And lignin gives the strength and support to it. That becomes wood. Okay? Wood is lignified cells. Transport in the xylem is a physical process. It's that transpiration we looked at last time, whereby you've got evaporation through the underside of the leaves, through the stoma, and again, because you've got osmosis going from a high concentration down at the bottom to a low concentration at the top, the water moves. So water moves upwards. It moves from the roots to the stem into the leaves. It's a one-way journey, and minerals are carried dissolved in that water. Okay, so that's how xylem are specially adapted for that process. If we compare that to phloem is slightly more complicated because phloem move food substances up and down. They move to growing parts of the plant for immediate use because those parts of the plants will require energy, so they will need glucose for respiration to take place, aerobic respiration. But also they will store some of that food for later on. That glucose will then be turned into insoluble carbohydrates like starch, and that will be stored in bulbs and tubers, which are generally the parts of the vegetables we tend to eat. Also, they will be used for developing seeds. So, transport in the phloem is an upwards and downwards process. Now, we mentioned last lesson the movement of water was transpiration. The movement of substances in the phloem is called translocation. Trans meaning across, location obviously changing, is the where it actually is. So the phloem are living cells. At the end of each cell are things called sieve tubes, and they're specialised for transport. They don't have any nuclei, but each sieve tube has a perforated end. So the cytoplasm connects one cell to the next, so the carbohydrates and also the glucose can move upwards and downwards. The food substances can move in two different directions. And there are companion cells next to those, which allows that to move. So that's the structure of a phloem, that's the structure of a xylem. Okay guys, that's it for that. What I want you to be able to do today is to explain the specialised cells structures and how they're adapted to do that. So if you fill the worksheet in for me, if you hang on to that worksheet, then that'd be great because I will email you out the answers later on. As usual, if you have any questions, please email me at crum@tahs.net. But otherwise, guys, have a great day and I'll see you later.